I don't believe it is a controversial take for me to say over the last few years the iPhone's design has become stagnant and basically just boring. Let's be honest, if I was to put in front of you the last 3 or 4 years of Pro iPhones, you would struggle to tell them apart. And quite honestly, I'm bored of it. And for that reason, for 1 week, I'm going to be moving over to the Moto Razr 40. This is a budget Android phone coming in at around £200, but has some really interesting and compelling features, including being one of the cheapest folding phones on the market right now. Everything that I do in my everyday life is powered by Apple. I have an Apple TV, I have an iPad, I run off of a Mac, so this transition could be a difficult one. But I think it's also going to be a really interesting experiment to find out just how easy it is to transition, and seeing what my life will be like if I were to be a little more green. Hello everybody, my name is Robert, and this is Bite Size Clue. So why did I choose the Moto Razr 40? Primarily I chose it for its price point. This baby can be picked up for around £200 now, and in the box you get everything you need to get started, including a 33-watt charger, a power cable, and also a case. It's very rare that you see these kinds of devices with cases, but it's a nice addition. The Razr 40 is last year's model, so it isn't the fastest thing in the world, and it's actually not going to be comparable to the iPhone that I'm switching from. I'm currently using an iPhone 15 Pro Max and I absolutely adore it, but as I mentioned, the design has just become a little boring for me. So over the next week, I'm actually going to be swapping out my SIM card, moving away from my iPhone completely and going full Android. Powering on the device and setting up, we're given the ability to actually transfer my data from an old phone, and iPhone is one of those options. Downloading the Move to Android app on the iPhone and connecting up both the phones via a USB-C cable basically allowed me to start to select the kinds of things that I'd like to move. This included contacts, any kind of media, so photos and videos that I've taken, and it also picked up on a lot of the apps that were already installed on my iPhone that had Android equivalents. This wasn't perfect, there were a few apps that were missing, but for the most part, it actually picked it up pretty well. The actual moving process took around 2 to 3 hours. I have quite a lot of data that I was transferring, but once it was done, I just popped my SIM card out, put it into the new phone, and I was ready to go. I was genuinely shocked by just how easy it was to move between the iPhone and Android. In the past, it's actually been a really difficult process that's had you jumping through a ton of different hoops just to get all of your data across. One thing that was missing and I was actually a little worried about was all of my passwords. You see, up to now, I've actually used Apple Password for all of my password needs because every device that I've used has had access to these passwords. Sure, I could have used a third-party manager, something like LastPass, but it's a little bit late now. Even the process of moving all my passwords was actually easier than I expected it to be. I can actually go into the Passwords app on my Mac and export all of my passwords as a CSV file, then just re-import them on my Google account through Google Chrome. So actually the process was the simplest it has ever been, and I'm really glad that that's the case. Moving back as well is just as simple with the Move to iOS app on the Android phones. The process is pretty much the same, just in reverse. Everything is really easy to move across, and I love that. So let's talk about the Moto 40 then. It's a folding phone, and it's one of the cheapest ones on the market at around £200, if you can get it for that price. Overall, I love the design of it. It's got a nice big screen, and on the front, it's actually got a little mini OLED screen. It's not taking over the whole back of the phone, but I actually see that as an advantage, because it means that I can quickly check my notifications, check the weather, manage my media, and also do a few quick actions without getting too distracted. I found it a really good tool for being able to interact with my phone without falling down a social media rabbit hole, which tended to happen a lot with my iPhone. So now my iPhone had been put away in the drawer and I was ready to start my Android journey, I came across my first hurdle. And that was that all of my family are actually on iOS. I rely on iMessage a lot to interact with my friends and family, particularly my wife. And sure, with iOS 18, RCS has become a thing, but it's not as simple as that. You see, for RCS to work properly, especially on the iOS side, your carrier has to enable an RCS server or run their own. This isn't the case on Android because Google are actually running their own RCS servers. If your carrier doesn't have one, it backs up to the Google one, and you can still talk over RCS through a couple of different Google devices. However, here in the UK, there is only really one carrier that has RCS support, and that is EE, or any of their subsidiaries if there is a company that's piggybacking off of EE's network. I'm with 3, so I don't have RCS support, which meant that I was kind of shit out of luck when it came to sending pictures and multimedia and getting reactions. I actually found it quite difficult. Now, sure, I could have used a third-party messaging app like WhatsApp, and that's actually what I ended up doing in this case. It's not a deal breaker, but I did find it rather inconvenient that I couldn't just continue to use my standard messaging platforms like I did before. So with that little inconvenience out of the way, I started on the rest of my week, and quite honestly, I actually didn't really notice much of a difference between the iPhone and the Android experience, for what I do anyway. Primarily I use it to check my emails, scroll through social media, maybe make a post or two, play a few games, and both phones did this absolutely perfectly. I actually preferred the compact design of the Moto 40. I think it looks different and fresh, and that is exactly what I was looking for during this move. I wanted something that didn't just look like another iPhone, and the Razr 40 definitely did that in a big way. Before we continue with this little experiment though, I do just want to say that if this is the first time that you're seeing my face on your screen, then 1, lucky you. And 2, go down there, hit that subscribe button, smash that notification bell so you get notified every time I upload. Anyway, let's move on with this video and talk a little bit about some of the other things that I do on my phone, including videos and photos. Now, sure, I really can't compare apples to Androids here, because the iPhone that I've got is the 15 Pro Max. This is well renowned for some of the best cameras on a smartphone. The Razr 40 is a more budget option. It started at around £600 and has quite quickly dropped in price. The cameras are pretty diabolical on this phone. Quite honestly, I'm pretty disappointed with it, and if I'd have paid the full £600, I would not have been impressed at all. Being a folding device, there are a few cool, interesting features that you can do. For example, you can prop it up and use it as a stand, and this gives you a little bit more control over taking some of those photos. You can also use the front-facing cameras to take a selfie through just double tapping the power button when you've got the device closed. This was a fun and neat feature, but framing a photo on such a small display was kind of difficult to do. There were a few things I actually preferred about my Android experience over the last week. The main one being customization and the kinds of apps that I could install. Android has always been well known for its customization options. With iOS 18, we could do a little more. We could tint the app icons, we could place them any way we wanted on iPhone. But there's still something missing in terms of the customization and the widgets that we have on Android. I truly felt like on my Android phone, it was my phone. In terms of apps as well, there are quite a few Android apps that you simply can't get on the iPhone. One of the major ones is actually Epic Games for installing games like Fortnite, Rocket League and Fall Guys. If you're outside of the EU, which I am in the UK, I can't install this or sideload this on iOS. I can do it on the Android devices, and actually I think that's one of the things that I loved the most about my experience, was that I could just sideload a load of apps if I wanted to. It wasn't all sunshines and rainbows, however, because I live my life on basically all Apple devices, and I really didn't think too much about how much I used continuity and the continuity features until I didn't have them anymore. For example, I copy and paste a lot of stuff from my phone to my Mac, and my Mac to my iPad, and so on and so forth. When I moved to Android, I couldn't do that anymore, obviously. I couldn't AirDrop either, and I was surprised by just how much I missed that feature. And I think that's the main reason that people are going to struggle to move away from an iOS device to an Android device. Because you're in that walled garden and all the devices work so damned well together, it's almost penalising you for moving away and having a little bit more choice. Sure, if I was on a Windows machine, I could do a lot of these things through a lot of the Android features, but I don't use a Windows machine, I use a Mac, and that's where the problem lies. Scrolling social media, watching movies, listening to music, talking to people, all of these things worked incredibly well on Android. Actually, I found the speakers on the Razr 40 to be significantly better than they were on the iPhone. Sure, the Razr 40 is not the fastest device in the world, but again, I wasn't expecting it to be. For what I use a phone for, outside of photos and videos, it worked perfectly fine. So at the end of my week then, will I be moving back to iOS? The simple answer is yes, and that's just because of the continuity features. I rely so heavily on them in my workflow and my daily life that I don't think I could ever truly move away again. That's not to say that I'm happy about it. There are a lot of things that Android does so well, particularly with their designs in the different phones and manufacturers. The folding phone is one of my favourite form factors, particularly in this clamshell design, because it just takes up a little bit less space, and with that smaller screen on the front, everything became a little less distracting when it came to messaging and notifications. Maybe down the line, Apple are going to release a folding phone, and I will love that day, and I'm sure it's going to be an absolutely incredible device. But there are a lot of things that I'm still going to miss from my Android experience. I will most likely continue to use the Razr 40 as a secondary device, because there are just stuff that I love about it so much. So there we have it, guys. Why don't you tell me what you think about the idea of moving between iOS and Android? Are there things that you miss on one platform that are there on the other? Do you think you could ever switch platforms completely and stay there? Why don't you let me know in the comments section down below, and of course while you're down there as well, get subscribed, because it genuinely does mean the world to me. Anyway guys, my name's Ben Roberts, this has been Bite Size Clue, and I will catch you in the next one. Adios.